Hey, what is going on, guys? Today in this video, I want to share with you my final thoughts after spending about 2 months with the HSU Research D15-Chimera and the Supercharger. And so this subwoofer, I've done a previous video on the sealed version, which is this top portion here. It's a dual opposing 15-inch drivers. They're both firing opposite directions. We've got a 1200 watt continuous amplifier. So I've got a link to that in the description, and I also reviewed the MFL6. These are small bookshelf type speakers, and I reviewed it with the sealed configuration. Now, although the sealed version left me wanting a little bit more than what it could offer, I really like what I'm hearing out of the ported version, which is the D15 Chimera with the Supercharger installed. So if you watch my previous video, this can be figured a couple of different ways. You can run it in a sealed configuration. You just have to leave the amp plate and then like the cover plate installed. If you remove that cover plate, move the amp plate to the rear of the subwoofer, then you place this on top of the port, which is on the bottom, and then that's what gives you the supercharged version. Now, at the time of this video, the sealed version is about $1,800. If you want to add the supercharger, that's another $500, bringing it up to $2,300 US. Now, first off, let's go ahead and dive into the aesthetics. As you can see here, this isn't a small subwoofer. I'm 5'11". This is about half the size of me. And so width-wise, not talking too much width, but the depth is pretty considerable. As you can see here, we've got this nice, beautiful satin black finish. And so it's got like a gloss to it. So if you have lights on in the room, it's going to have some reflections off of it, but it's a very soft reflection. I really like the rounded edges. That gives a nice aesthetic appeal there. And the subwoofer can be mounted either long ways this way, or you could turn it sideways to where you would see one of the speaker grills. Really just depends on what look you're going after. Now, because of this satin black finish, if you were to touch it with your bare hands, you're more than likely going to be able to see the fingerprints on it. And so this type of finish, I would always recommend using the included white gloves if you're going to be touching it or moving it, but just know that going into it. So looking at the side here, we do have two large wooden grills. And so these speaker grills are not magnetic. They have the little metal posts here. So you do have to line those up, get those just right. But I found that these are very tight, very snug, and they're not going to come off during high excursion. Now, depending on the aesthetics of your room, this may or may not be ideal. As you can see in my room, I wanted to have the drivers firing to the side of this wall. I didn't want one driver just firing directly into the wall and reflecting. I figured that would cause a little bit of boominess in it. And so by doing that, you actually have to stick this out into your room. So if this was in a corner of your room, may not be an issue, but if you don't have space for a corner, as you can see, it kind of just sticks out in the middle of the room. Now, as I mentioned, you can rotate this. So I've got this on some coasters. Basically, these are like furniture sliders, and so that allows me to much more easily move this unit, because this weighs about 150 pounds. But on the sliders, as you can see, I can easily, I'm gonna go ahead and unplug this. I'm gonna remove the XLR cable. But as you can see, I can easily rotate this all the way around. And back here, you can see the 1200 watt amplifier. On the rear of the subwoofer, we do have balanced XLR inputs as well as unbalanced RCA inputs. One thing you'll notice, instead of having an in and an out, we actually have both of these as inputs for a left and a right. So using dual XLR inputs would be used primarily in a 2-channel setup where the left and the right sub output is not summed. So in a home theater situation, you could just use a single XLR input like I did. If you don't have XLR, of course, you can use the RCA inputs. You've got your normal gain. Here's where you would adjust the operating mode. So if you were running in 2 ports open, you would put it on 5, which is where I typically ran it in my room. If you switch it to number 4, that would be 3 ports open, 3 would be 4 ports open, and so forth. You've got some more DSP adjustments here with Q control. You can adjust the crossover frequency. If you're running an LFE, so in a home theater system, I always recommend just leaving this wide open at the highest setting, which is 120 Hertz. When you do that, you want to set this crossover switch to out, and that way it lets the internal amplifier know that you don't want to utilize this crossover that's built into this amplifier, but instead you're going to be using your AVR or your processor to do your bass management and set your crossover settings. Over on the far right, you can either leave it on, have it on auto, so it auto senses when the signal is coming into the amplifier to turn it on and off, or manually turn it off. If you have an older AVR and you do not have RCA or XLR, you can utilize the high level inputs here. Now here you can see we've got 4 large rubber feet right here. Of course, in this configuration, you're not utilizing these, but just know that these feet are on the bottom of this ported box down here. So let's flip it back around and let's look at those ports. So down here you can see we can configure this subwoofer in a multitude of ways. You can run this sealed. You can run it with 2 ports open. You can run it with 3 ports open, 4 ports open. It really depends on how you want to tune it. Then on the rear of the subwoofer, there is a dial. So make sure whatever you are running this, if you're running it 2 ports open, make sure that dial shows 2 ports open. It's really important that you do this because you could damage the subwoofer because it's going to tweak the internal DSP to match whatever the ports are. So here we are inside of REW, which is Room EQ Wizard. I took some measurements of the SU Research D15-Chimera with the Supercharger. And so here we can see this one is 2 ports open. You can see it listed right down here. So we're getting pretty good response all the way down to about 16 hertz. And then you can see it starts to roll off pretty quickly below 16 hertz. Let's see, so if I come down to about right here, so we're still getting good response down to 14 hertz. Then when we measured it with 3 ports open, very similar response on the low frequency, so about 16 hertz and below. We're pretty consistent here, but we do get a little bump here, a few dB of increase in output from about 16 hertz, pretty much all the way over to 70 hertz here. So good solid output. You see we're at 110 dB at 19 hertz. At 16 hertz, we're at 108 dB. So still very, very good. And then if we open up for 4 ports, you can see here's where we get more deviation. So with 4 ports open, you're going to get less low end extension. You can see this is pretty decent amount. It starts rolling off much sooner. So here we're at 23 hertz, and then you can see, so let me go ahead and turn these off, make it a little bit easier to see. So right here you can see at about 23, 21, somewhere around in there, that's when it starts to decrease and it rolls off pretty quickly here. So definitely just gives you an idea of how changing those ports, and again, make sure on the back of the sub you're matching up however many ports you have open with this setting on the back so that you're using the proper DSP. Now, since we have dual opposing woofers on each side, what that typically does is cancel a lot of the vibrations of the subwoofer. So one way that I can test that is just putting a glass of water. I'll also put an SPL meter, crank up some music or at least a movie clip, and let's see how it does. So now let's talk about the sound, because really that's what we're here for, right? What does it sound like? What is the experience like having this in your room? And so I typically go through my normal Kaleidescape script. So I've got some music, I've got some movies, and these are pretty well known. There's some big action sequences, but I recently added a new one, and I'm going to kind of focus on that one. So I was flipping through Kaleidescape and I saw one of the watched movies, one that I've been kind of eyeballing, but I just wasn't ready to buy it yet, was Ballerina. So Ballerina right now is $15 on Kaleidescape. So I had purchased it, and I won't spoil the movie, but there's a scene kind of near the end, and let's just say it involves some flamethrowers. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. This will give your subwoofer a workout. Very, very explosive energy. There's some really deep frequencies there. just some great material to test out your subwoofer. And so of course I cranked this up. I want to see what they've got. And at no point did I feel like it was strained. It didn't sound distorted. I didn't hear any port chuffing, but man, just a good experience. It put a big old smile on my face. I'm watching that particular scene just going, this is what movies should feel like. Those of you that do not have a proper, like just a good quality subwoofer, I'm telling you guys, you're missing out. I believe two of the most important elements of a good home theater is a good subwoofer and a good center channel. Of course, all the components make up for the best experience, but man, if you're lacking in your center channel, you're missing out. But if you're lacking in the subwoofer department, if you've got a really tiny subwoofer, or it just doesn't have a lot of output, or it bottoms out during those big explosions, I'm telling you guys, get you a quality subwoofer. And I believe this is one of those quality subwoofers. SU Research has always provided just huge value in their speakers, but also in their subwoofers. They're really known for their subwoofers. And this is one of those where they're like, look, we want to step up our game from the TN1, give you even more output and less distortion, less port chuffing. Now, I didn't hear any port chuffing during that scene, even when cranking it up. Really, the only time I heard any port chuffing was like during when I was taking measurements, because then it's just a frequency sweep. You don't have a lot of stuff going on in the room. You don't have your main speakers kind of overpowering that. And so that was the only time I would hear it. It's just like a little flutter. And it's basically just not enough air can come out quick enough. And I don't think I've ever owned a ported sub that didn't have some amount of port chuffing. Again, nothing distracting while I was watching content, like actual content. It was only when I was measuring I could hear some flutter there. But during that ballerina scene, man, when cranks up those flamethrowers, dude, this room was just rocking. Lots of LFE, lots of tactile, lots of energy. I was just feeling it. And that's what you want when watching a movie. You want the subwoofer to bring you into that experience, to that explosion, to, you know, the percussion if you're listening to music, and especially drums, things like that. And I really believe that the Chimera D15 with the Supercharger, I like that. I really like that. The sealed version was good, but it didn't have enough output for me. It didn't have enough low-end extension. You know, when it's going down to about 30 hertz, I believe I measured it, with the sealed version, that's not enough for me. I really believe for home theater, and I even talked to Dr. Sue, he said, yeah, we didn't really design the sealed one for home theater. That's what we made the Supercharger for. Like, this thing will dig down, like you saw in the measurements, down about 14 hertz. That's solid. To me, if you can hit 20 hertz, that's great. Anything below 20 hertz, fantastic. Anything below 10 hertz, that's amazing, okay? But this won't break your bank, and as long as you've got the space for it, I think that's the biggest challenge with this. The style of it with the dual opposing and just the size of it, could provide some challenges, especially if you're putting this in a living room. But if you're single, who cares? Crank that thing up, let it stand out. It's a showpiece. But if you're like in my house, I've got a wife, I've got kids, they don't want this in my living room. I would have to have this in something like this, a dedicated theater room, kind of tucked away where, you know, it really just doesn't matter. But the way I've got it here, it's not super ideal because it sticks out into the room. But I shared with you why I wanted to do that. And but even if I turned it sideways, you're still you're going to see the amp plate one way or the other, either on the one side or the other side, and all the wires. So there's not a good way to keep that clean. So if aside from that, man, I really don't see any negatives in this subwoofer. Provides great amount of output. Digs down to, like I said, about 15 hertz, 14 hertz, depending on what port tune you choose. And as long as you've got the size and the space, man, this thing will perform. And so I'll have a link to the Chimera D15 down in the description below, both the sealed as well as with the supercharger. If it's a good fit, man, definitely check it out. I don't think you'll be disappointed at all. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the SU Research D15 Chimera with the supercharger. Let me know down in the comments your thoughts on it. Do you think it'd be a good fit for your home theater? Let me know. Hope you guys have an incredible week. God bless, and I will catch you in the next video.